And we have more goodness to know about today because Pastor Carmen is here. She's been here before, but maybe not everyone has been here when she's been here. So we are really delighted to have her, and we know we're going to be blessed by her message as well. She and her husband, Scott, and their 3 teenage children, so just saying that, you can just pray for Carmen and Scott, 3 teenagers, right? They live in Ludington, and they moved here from Pennsylvania, where Carmen was a pastor at that time, so we're glad she moved further west for us. Carmen is also a co-founder of, I say it's a business, it's really a ministry called Humanity Tea Room in Ludington. It not only serves high-quality tea and other goodies, but it serves as a mission to support the work in the justice area and awareness of human trafficking. And we've heard that before in some of our ministry here in even in Baldwin. So we know that what she's trying to do and her co-workers has a wide impact throughout this world. Several of us have visited the tea shop and found it very delightful. They have actually moved to a different location in Ludington on the main drag, actually. So I'd encourage everybody to look it up and have some fun. Carmen is always ready to share Christ love, and we are delighted to give her, to have her give that message to us today. So Carmen, would you do that? Thank you.
Well, thank you for the gracious introduction. Yes.
Excuse the kids for Sunday school.
Oh, we need to excuse the children for Sunday school. So if you are of the age of Sunday school, now is your time, and that's about the extent of the information I know about what to tell you about that. All right, it looks like we got them going out. So thank you for that gracious introduction. I do need to say one thing is that we really need to get a different picture of me for up there. We've talked about that. So that's not on me. It's not on anybody else. I need to get them that one got ripped off of Facebook, I think. So anyway, thank you for having me here again. My name is Carmen, and I am really thrilled to be here with you today and to be able to celebrate Independence Day weekend with you all. I don't know about you, but for me, I have some really good memories of like 4th of July weekends. Growing up, 4th of July weekend was always my extended family reunion weekend, and I have a really, really big extended family. So we would have this big, huge field, and we would all gather in the field, and we would bring picnic foods and just have a full day of playing and running. And for some reason, a standout memory for me and all of that was everyone would bring these watermelons. Well, not everyone, because that would be a lot of watermelons, but lots of people would bring watermelons. And there was a creek that ran by the field where we all gathered, and we would put the watermelons in the creek to keep them cold throughout the day while we were picnicking. And then at some point in the afternoon, we'd pull them out, we'd cut them open. They were just refreshing and cool and just fun memories of Independence Day weekend. And I love that heritage that I get to celebrate, of remembering that celebration with my family on 4th of July weekend. And so I'm glad that we get to celebrate our country on this 4th of July weekend, and I'm thankful for the heritage that we have in this country. I'm glad that we have a heritage in our country that says one nation under God. And I know there's a lot of people that have worked hard to protect that banner of one nation under God. And there's good in that when it's done well. But sometimes I have to wonder, when we are protecting our banner of one nation under God, what are we really pursuing as Christians in this country? Are we trying to protect the one nation under God because we truly want a relationship with God? Or are we trying to protect that banner of one nation under God just because we want the benefits that come with it? Because life will be a little easier if we can protect that banner. It's kind of a challenging question to ask. Do we really want God? Or do we just want his inheritance? Do we want his heart? Or just his benefits? And so we're going to talk about that a little bit today. Not necessarily in the context of our country, but in the context of our own hearts. Jesus had something to say about a son that was after the inheritance of his father more than he was after the heart of his father. And we're going to unpack that story a little bit today. It's the story of the prodigal son in Luke chapter 15, and I'm sure most of you have at least some level of familiarity with that particular story. And I personally have always been captured by this story because there's so much in it that resonates for me. It's a story of a journey of a child who wanders far away from home, far away from his father, but then makes his way back home again. And it's the story of a father who longs to embrace his children home again, longs to be in relationship with his children. And so this is the story that I'd like for us to talk about today. And I want to challenge you today to picture where you are in this story. Where are you in this story? Do you resonate more with the story of the wayward son, the prodigal son, the one who wandered off, made some bad choices, found himself in a place of regret before he turned back home? Or do you find yourself, in the shoes of the older son, the one who stayed home, kept his nose clean, followed the rules, did what he was supposed to do, and yet in the end kind of felt like, maybe I got the short end of the stick on this. I'm a little angry because I'm not getting all the things that I thought that I should be getting out of this particular relationship. The interesting thing to me in this story is that whichever brother we most resonate with, the problem is the same. Both are far from the heart of the Father. Both are not longing for the heart of the Father. Both are more entitled to feeling a sense of entitlement to the inheritance of the Father and the wealth of the Father. And yet, both are invited home. So, if you have your Bibles today, I want to invite you to flip to Luke chapter 15, because that's the story we're going to hang out in today. And I want to start right away at Luke 15, verse 1, because I think that the audience that Jesus is speaking to is important for us to kind of pay attention to a little bit. So, Luke 15, Luke 15, verse 1 says, tax collectors and other notorious sinners often came to listen to Jesus teach. This made the Pharisees and the teachers of religious law complain that he was associating with such despicable people, even eating with them. So Jesus used this illustration. So then Jesus proceeds to tell the story of a lost sheep, a lost coin, and a lost son. Kind of these three illustrations in progressive order of the importance or the significance of the thing that was lost. First a coin, then a sheep, then a son. And I think we often presume, when we look at the story of the lost son, that this story was directed towards those wayward ones, because there were tax collectors and notorious sinners that were there with him. And I think sometimes we presume that this whole story is all about the wayward one, and there is a piece of that that's beautiful and rich in this. But I also want us to look at the fact that that's not really who Jesus was directing this story to. Because he's saying that the Pharisees were hanging out there, and they were kind of angry that they had to associate with the riffraff because they were too good to be associating with the riffraff. And if they wanted to be near Jesus, who was maybe the Messiah, they weren't sure, they hadn't decided on that for themselves yet. But if they wanted to be in with the important one, the one that was kind of like making waves and making a name for himself around town, they had to do that next to those notorious sinners, and we're a little too good for that. So Jesus tells this story. That word "so" there is pretty important. So that's why Jesus is telling the story. Because the Pharisees had their little panties in a bunch about the fact that the notorious sinners were there with them. So Jesus uses this illustration. So I want you to hang on to that little tidbit, because we're going to circle back to that in a little bit. But I just want to plant that nugget in your head right now, that this is who the story was actually, the illustration was actually kind of targeted to, was that audience of the Pharisees. So now let's jump forward a few verses to verse 11 to start the parable of the lost son. And it begins with a boy who is running away from home. Luke 15, verse 11 to 13. To illustrate the point further, this was after he told the story, the other two stories of the lost coin and the lost sheep. Jesus told them this story. A man had two sons. The younger son told his father, "I want my share of your estate now, instead of waiting until you die." So his father agreed to divide his wealth between his sons. A few days later, his younger son packed all his belongings and took a trip to a distant land, and there he wasted all of his money on wild living. So the son comes to the father and he demands his inheritance, and he demands it immediately. And in effect, what he's saying to his father is that I don't care if you're dead or if you're alive, I just want the stuff that I've come to me. I just want this stuff that you have to offer me. The original listeners would have been totally appalled by this request, because even though it would have been expected that a son would have gotten some level of inheritance, for the son to come and ask before the father had passed away would have been egregious disrespect. It would have been even more unthinkable to the listeners if the father granted it to him. This little snot doesn't deserve anything, right? But it would have been like a huge disrespect, because essentially this son is saying that his relationship with his father was just a means to an end to get to his wealth. And now he's tired of that relationship, and so he wants out. Ouch, right? And I feel like this begs the question, at what point would a kid have the audacity to go to his dad and ask a question like that? I don't think you just wake up one morning and be like, hey, this is a good idea for today. I'm just going to go ask for my inheritance and we're going to be on our merry way. It's probably not how it happened. I have to believe that there was a process to the way that his mind started shifting and turning, that he would have started feeding his discontent. I don't like where I am. I see something more out there. I wish I didn't have to be here at home. This farm work is hard. Looks like other people have it easier out there. I want to go out there. He probably was rehearsing over and over again this idea of discontent, that where I am is not good enough. What's out there is something better. And I have to imagine that his mind would have started fixating on that, because our minds fixate on what we feed them, right? That's what we rehearse in our mind is what we start to believe as truth. And so he's feeding this misdirected longing. And the idea is that something out there is better. Something that will satisfy his discontent is found out there. It's this longing that he's having, a misdirected longing. And I think we all know that feeling, right? That feeling of a longing, that discontent that bubbles up inside of us and says, I just want more. I get that feeling a lot when I eat chocolate. But sometimes I get that feeling that comes from a deeper place inside of myself. Sometimes those longings come from the core of who we are, that I want just something more. I want to be more significant of a person. I want to be a person who matters. I want to live a life that makes a difference. I want to be secure. I want to make sense out of life. I want to find peace. I want to be well. I want to be whole. I want to love and be loved. These longings are not necessarily a bad thing. Longings are a good thing because they're designed to lead us back to the heart of God, the place where those longings will truly be fulfilled. But the problem is that too often our longings, they get derailed, right? We get confused about the place that really is going to bring us significance and value and wholeness and peace and love. And like the prodigal son, we start looking off in distant lands, distant countries, thinking that something out there is going to fill this hole inside of me. Something out there is going to be the peace of satisfaction. And we start looking for that significance and that value in the stuff that we accumulate, or in the tasks that we perform, or in the job that we hold. And we start looking for wholeness in the perfect body and hours on the treadmill. And we start looking for peace in the right vacation or the perfect hobby. If I just invest a little more in this or make a little more time there, then I'm going to find peace. We look for love by finding just the right person and then making all these unrealistic expectations that that right person is going to fill every need inside of our soul, right? We look for security, sometimes in our country. If we have the right leaders and the right laws, then we're going to feel secure. This misplaced hope of what really provides a future, right? These distant countries are places that we so often turn to for what we deeply desire. And I know about this because I chased those for a really long time in my life, to be honest. I just longed to know that I was worth something. And I didn't turn home to the Father to find that sense of value. Instead, I went off to my distant country. And for me, my distant country looked like achievements and productivity and appearing like the one who always had her stuff together, right? And in the end, you know what? I didn't find value. I didn't feel like I was loved. I felt exhausted. I felt tired. I felt like there was always one more thing I had to do to be good enough. One more thing I had to do to prove myself. One more thing that I had to do. And I always lived in the sense of fear as well, that at any moment, someone's going to see behind the curtain and know that I'm not as good as like I'm trying to pretend that I am. And it was this frantic pace of trying to always do one more thing, be a little bit better, be a little bit better than the person next to me, produce a little bit more, achieve a little bit more. And I was afraid that someday all of that was going to come crashing down like a house of cards and people would be disappointed in me. I would be disappointed in myself. And so I just kept working harder and more and always more and never enough. And at some point I needed to realize, and I did, thankfully, by the grace of God, realize my longing to be accepted and valued has nothing to do with my performance. I can come back from that distant country and say, you know what, home in the heart of the Father is the only place that that longing is ever truly going to be filled. I wonder if you have a distant country that's kind of your go-to. Because that country wants to pull me sometimes. Even though I've learned layers of healing in that, it still wants to pull me sometimes. And I'm wondering if you have a distant country that you maybe turn to, setting out for it to fill your longings. I don't know what your thing is, whether it's achievement like me, whether it's career, whether it's pleasure, whether it's, name one of 100 things, but it's a question worth sitting with, and you're not going to figure that out in the next 30 seconds. But I encourage you to consider at some point stopping and just paying attention to when I start to feel that frantic thing inside, or that thing inside that feels discontent. What's your natural inclination to pull towards a distant country that invites you to say, get your longing filled here, more than the heart of the Father? It's something worth paying attention to. Because I think we've all found ourselves in one of those distant countries at one point or another. And then we wake up at one point and we realize we are far from home, and there's this sense of regret when we realize that we're in that place. That time when you all of a sudden realize, oh my word, what have I done? What have I done? Maybe they were words that you used with somebody that you wished you could take back and now you can't. That moment of regret that says, I did something that just can't be undone. There's a relationship that's now damaged. There's a financial debt that's debilitating. Or you're looking back and you realize, I missed it. I missed it. I chose badly. I could have been investing in my family and my kids, and I chose something else that I thought was going to bring me fulfillment instead. And you wish more than anything you could go back and do it all over again. Do it differently next time. We know that feeling, right? I wish I had. I wish I hadn't. And no amount of fixing can fix it. That's a moment of regret, right? But here's the beautiful thing. The moment of regret is at the same time a moment of hope. Why? Because it's the moment we realize that we can choose something different. It's the moment we realize the place that we are is not the place that God intended for us to be. And now we can turn towards home. The moment of regret is exactly at the same time a moment of hope, because now we realize, we see the reality of the place that we are. And we realize we can turn towards home again. The moment of regret is the moment we turn towards home. And the prodigal found that moment in the pig pen. Luke 15, verse 14 to 19. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am, starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Just make me like one of your hired servants.'" So the money runs out. And to make things worse, the money runs out during a time of a big recession across the land. Major recession hits. And this kid hits the bottom. He's out of money, he's out of friends, he's out of family, he's out of food. And so he's literally starving to death and lands this job feeding the pigs. Now, keep in mind, this is a good little Jewish boy, and he's feeding the pigs. That's rock bottom for a Jewish kid, because by Jewish law, you don't associate with pigs, you don't touch pigs, you don't have anything to do with pigs. And he takes a job feeding the pigs, and even more than that, he almost wishes that he were the pig, because at least the pigs are eating something, and I don't even have anything to eat. This kid is at rock bottom. And there's nothing like a pig pen to make someone come to their senses, right? He looks at the predicament that he's in, and he realizes that what he's been chasing has let him down. It wasn't anywhere close to what he thought it would be. And he starts to understand that there is something worth going home to. And now I can imagine that the conversation that starts happening in his mind is very different than the one that happened before he left home. Before he left home, he was rehearsing all of the things that will be better out there. If only I can get there. If only out there is going to give me all the things that I'm longing for, all that sense of fulfillment, all of that fun, all of that good stuff. And now he's having a whole different conversation in his head. He's starting to realize home was pretty sweet. My father, he's a good man. And he starts replaying, instead of feeding the discontent in his mind, he starts replaying the faithfulness and the goodness of his father. Fits in really well with that song that Julie just sang, wherever you went, Julie. He starts replaying that. And he starts to realize that's where the truth is. That's where my longing will be filled. That's where I really belong, because he begins to focus on the character of the Father. And even though he has no illusions that he's going to be welcomed back as a son, he's blown that one. He knows that. He also knows that the hired men in his father's house, at his father's estate, are treated way better than his current situation. And so banking on that, banking on the goodness and the integrity and the character of his father to treat everyone with basic human decency and dignity, even him, he's hoping, after what he's done, he starts to hope that he's going to be taken back, and he heads towards home. So he got up, and he went to his father. Right from where he was. There was no getting his act together first. There was no trying to put on a good facade. He was too tired for all of that, I have to believe. It was simply a repentant heart and a journey home. Now, if you're like me, you prefer a good self-help plan, right? We like that a little bit better, especially when it comes to finding my way back to God, because I feel like I need to earn it, right? I can't just come as I am. No, I need to clean up first. I need to show you that I can do this, that I can do that I'm really sorry about this. I need to bring you something to offer God. I've got this nice little self-help plan laid out. God just shakes his head at me so many times, I think, like, will you ever learn, child? But you know what? By God's grace, there have been seasons where I've learned layers. There have been seasons of my life that I have been totally flattened and stripped of any kind of possibility of a self-help plan, where I've reached the total end of myself. Seasons where I've gone through emotional stuff and relational stuff, significant emotional and relational stuff, significant marriage stuff, health stuff, cancer, injuries, disease, more cancer, heart surgeries. There have been times in my life that I have been just brought to the end of myself. Some excruciatingly hard seasons. But here's the good in that. Those seasons are actually a gift, because they brought me to the end of myself. They brought me to a place where there is no strength left in me. I am just broken. And being able to see that reality of myself, that there is nothing left in me. I'm just broken. There is no self-help plan that I could even begin to muster up from the inside of myself. And in that, that's where God is. That's the place where God is saying, I can work with that now. Now that you're ready to step aside, now that you're ready to say you're at the end of yourself, that's where the strength really is. Because I can finally get to the place where I'm at the end of myself and I stand before God with nothing else to offer. Because there's nothing else to offer. It's just me and God. And a new level inside of me that says, God, I need you in a way that I have never recognized that I have needed you before. I wonder if anyone else in this room today has experienced a season where they have been flattened. Maybe you're even in one now, I don't know. But I do wonder if maybe instead of fighting that season, maybe it's time to surrender to it. Stop trying so hard to be strong in the middle of it, and instead just be broken in it. And come with open hands before God saying, okay, I'm done with the self-help plan. I'm done trying to be strong. I just need you to be strength in me. And I think that's where we see the son in this story. There's no strength left in him. He's just barely dragging his tail towards home, limping towards home. And here's how I see the homecoming, Luke 15:20. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. And he ran to his son and he threw his arms around him and he kissed him. I love this picture of well, for you it's there, for me it's up there, but of the father running. You see the desperation in his face, like that urgency, that running. He was willing to throw aside his dignity and his respect to run to this son that his community would have told him you shouldn't have anything to do with him. And yet this father had been watching and he had been waiting, and he sees the son in the distance and he runs to him. There's something about the imagery of this part of the story that has always captured me. It's just, there's so much beauty and richness in the thought that there is a God who would run to us that way. And I can picture the father and the son running to one another, one with a longing for a son who is finally home, and the other just longing for a place to collapse and rest in a safe spot. There's something beautiful about the passion of that, and about the love of the Father who is watching and waiting. And for me, it's taken me a long time to learn to believe, to really believe that the Father would do this for me, that he would run to me like that, even when I've messed up so badly, that he would just turn and run, no matter what, when my heart finally turns towards home. I guess it's a process of learning for me to dare to believe that I am loved with that kind of passion. Not even despite my imperfections, but maybe even because of them. Before I clean up, before I try to perform, before I try to pay my own way, before I try to make myself presentable, before all of that, the Father just turns and he runs and he loves, simply because I am his child. One summer when I was working through some of that really hard stuff that I was mentioning, it was this story that just kept coming back to my mind over and over again. And a friend suggested, take some time and sit with it. If this story keeps coming back to your mind, just take some time and sit with it. And so I did. I took an afternoon and I just sat with that story and kind of meditated on the scripture and just, God, what do you want to say to me? What do you really want me to hear from you in this? And I want to read to you just a little piece of my journal from that afternoon of what God kind of did in my heart through ruminating on this story. And this is what I had written. So I sat with this story for a little bit. It played out like a movie in my head. I watched as the characters each played their parts, and then I watched as the prodigal son was running to his father and his father running to him. And as he ran, he began to change in my mind's eye. In my mind's eye, the prodigal son began to morph from a first century Jewish boy to a 20th century little girl running to her father. Suddenly, I wasn't watching the story anymore. I was in the story. I was the girl running to her father, colliding into him in a mournful, sobbing embrace. I felt that moment of impact. This wasn't a gliding gracefully through the field like a scene from a sappy movie picture. This was a real, tangible, gritty impact, running smack into the chest of the father, feeling the almost violent embrace. I could almost hear the crash of bodies pounded together in a desperate grip right there on the dusty, dirty road. The embrace didn't happen in the pristine and sanitized homestead. There was no clean robe, no freshly washed face. No, the embrace happened right there on that road, in the dirt, as her tears created rivers of mud as they spilled down her face. In all the brokenness, in all the imperfection, in all the mistakes, this is where the Father met her. This is where she felt the thud of her body running headlong into the chest of the Father. And suddenly I knew. This is what had been eluding me. The embrace of the Father, the weeping on his shoulder, the waiting for him to run to me, the waiting for me to run to him, and the nearness of a God who collapses with me on a dusty road, and the neediness of a little girl who longs to simply melt into the embrace of her Father. This is what it is to be loved. And how does the Father respond? Luke 15:22. But the Father said to his servants, "Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fatted calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead, and now he's alive again. He was lost, and now he's found." And so they began to celebrate. The one who was lost was home. And this wasn't an awkwardly silent, like tiptoeing around kind of homecoming, like, "Oh, I know you messed up. We're just going to like walk around in quiet, awkward judgment and criticism for a while." Not even a little bit. This was a celebration. Immediately, the Father's like, "Let's celebrate. I'm not going to condemn you. I'm not going to judge you. You're home. Let's just forget that stuff and celebrate." This is a picture of the gospel, my friends. It is insanely beautiful, and I think I could sit in it all day long and still never fully comprehend all that it means. And I can only imagine for those tax collectors and those notorious sinners that were sitting in the crowd, how beautiful this story would have felt to them as it washed over them. To hear for once, probably in their whole life, that there is not judgment for you. There is just a welcome home when you turn to the Father and say, "I'm ready to be done with myself." I can only imagine how that felt. But remember what we said at the beginning? We said the point of this story wasn't necessarily for those people. The point of this whole illustration was for the Pharisees. So what about that? Let's look at what happens next. Let's look at how the older brother responds. Luke 15, starting verse 25. Meanwhile, the older son was in the fields working. When he returned home, he heard music and dancing in the house, and he asked one of the servants what was going on. "Your brother is back," he was told, "and your father has killed the calf we were fattening and prepared a feast. We're celebrating because of his safe return." And the older brother was angry, and he would not go in. His father came out and begged him, "Come on in, join the celebration." But he replied, "All these years, I've worked hard for you and never once refused to do a thing that you told me to. And in all that time, you never gave me even one young goat for a feast to celebrate with my friends. Yet this son of yours comes back after squandering all of your money on prostitutes, and you celebrate by killing the finest calf that we have?" His father said to him, "Look, dear son, everything I have is yours. We had to celebrate this happy day because your brother was dead and has come back to life. He was lost, and now he's found." The older brother, he's not having it, right? The older brother, he's like, I don't think so. And in some ways, I have to admit, I kind of get it. Didn't really seem fair, did it? Kind of understand. I wondered about it. Got a point. Why does the irresponsible one get a party, and I'm the one who's been sitting here all along? I never got a thing. You owe me. Not him. He didn't deserve it. Pharisees, they're not liking this so much. But this is the thing about Jesus, is he's always turning things upside down. He's giving us a much deeper picture of sin. A picture that would have put the Pharisees back on their heels. And honestly, there's a little bit of Pharisee inside of me sometimes too, and it kind of puts me back on my heels as well. Because here's the picture that he's actually revealing. He's showing the good son is just as distant from the Father as the wayward son. The good son is just as far from the heart of the Father as the wayward son was. Because the older brother, he's not really in it because of the relationship with the Father. He didn't want a close relationship with Dad any more than the younger brother did. He's simply working his plan to get the goods, to get the inheritance. Older brothers obey God to get things. I did all these things for you. You never even gave me a party. You never even gave me a goat. You owe me. Older brothers don't obey God to get God himself. They obey God to get the benefits, to get the inheritance. You see, when we act like the older brother, we stop believing that we need the Father because we're doing all of the things that we're supposed to do in order to lead a moral life. We kind of like work our way out of even needing God because I'm doing all the right things. Why would I need your grace anymore? Why would I need you to step in for me? Because I'm doing okay. I'm following the rules. I'm keeping my nose clean. If I keep all the laws, if I've done all the work, then I have rights, and you owe me. It's like a vending machine, God. I do my part, I push in the right buttons, excuse me, and then the thing I ordered is just supposed to pop right on out. And if it doesn't, I feel cheated. I shake that machine until that thing comes out because it owes me. I put in the money and I push the buttons, and now it's supposed to come out the way that it was intended to be. I did my part, and now God owes me. He owes me my answered prayers. He owes me a good life. He owes me my ticket to heaven. He owes me that inheritance. I don't need a Savior who offers me grace because I've already earned it by being good, or at least good enough. We would never say that out loud, right? But sometimes our hearts are revealed in that, aren't they? And I think that's why older brother lostness is so dangerous. Because when we have a heart like the older brother, we're kind of blind to our lostness. Older brothers don't go to God handing over their brokenness and seeking the grace of the Father. Older brothers go to God handing over their accomplishments and demanding their rewards. So how do we know if we're nurturing an older brother heart? I think probably the best litmus test is to look at what happens when things don't go the way we want them to go. What happens when the prayer doesn't get answered the way that we want? How do I respond? Do I get angry? I don't deserve this. I did what I was supposed to do. I prayed hard, God. You're supposed to answer when I pray. Now, that's different than just not understanding God's answer, but when you get angry, like, I did my part and you didn't do yours. It's a litmus test. And maybe some older brother heart stuff creeping in. Or maybe when things don't turn out the way we want it, maybe the other thing that might reveal a little older brother in us is we start to bargain. We start to bargain with God. It didn't turn out the way I wanted, so I start wondering, like, what did I not do that made God not answer this for me the right way? And then we start bargaining. Well, God, if you do this, then I'll work harder. I'll be better. I'll do this thing. I'll do that thing. We're making this transactional, like, my part, then your part. That's part of older brother mentality. When our reckoning with God becomes a formula as a means to get what we want, to get the inheritance we expect, then something has shifted inside of us in an unhealthy way. The younger brother, he came to his senses, and he realized that he longed to be back home with the father. He longed to be there. He wanted to be there more than anything. He got to this place that he realized, like, there is just goodness in being home with the father. And because of that, he was embraced. He was restored. But the older brother, his being good, his self-righteousness was his biggest stumbling block. And because he felt cheated, he missed the celebration. He missed the party. He missed the homecoming. He missed the joy of the Father. All of the good things that I think would have probably really healed his heart were the things that he missed because of that stumbling block. I think this older brother thing would have hit pretty hard with the Pharisees. Hits pretty hard with me sometimes. How often am I doing all of the good things that I miss the beauty of the grace of God? How often do I fail to feel the embrace of the Father meeting me on the road because I'm so busy doing my stuff in my own little Christian world and building these things and building those things that I don't stop to remember, to think, to rehearse the faithfulness of the Father and admit my brokenness in it and enjoy the embrace, feel the longing, and embrace the celebration. It challenges me. Why do I pursue God really and truly? Because I'm doing my duty as a good Christian girl, or because I really long for the heart of the Father? Do I just want the rewards that come with being a good Christian? Or do I really long to be home with the Father? Do I simply want to be near him? To love the things that he loves? To celebrate the things that he celebrates? And to know his heart and reflect it to the world around me? More than anything, I want to learn how to know that embrace. I want to learn how to long for him with everything that is in me. I love this final picture that I have for you today because I think maybe this is what it will feel like when we finally come home. I think we have one last picture there. It's a picture of a God who embraces, a God who knows the weariness. And no matter what kind of brokenness we carry, he opens his arms to anyone who turns towards home and invites us into a beautiful, rich, deep eternity with him. Welcome home. Let's pray. Father God, we are in awe of the depth of your grace that says that from no matter where we are, we can always turn home. I confess that I can't even truly begin to understand your character that is so patient and so long-suffering, that is willing always to invite us into your embrace and into your celebration and into your love without thought of judgment, without thought of criticism. Thank you, God, for that extravagant grace. Forgive me, Father. Forgive us, Father, for the times that we demand of you. We've done our part, and now you're supposed to do yours. Forgive our hearts and teach our hearts and our eyes to see when our hearts get led to those places, when we allow them to degenerate to those places, and teach us how to turn back towards you. God, we want to know your home. We want to know your heart. Teach us. Amen.